The Galactic Council had watched Earth for 300 years. They watched from stations that floated in the darkness between stars. They watched with machines that could see through clouds and walls. They watched humans fight wars and make peace. They watched them build cities and destroy forests. They watched them reach for the moon and return safely home. For 300 years the Council debated, were humans dangerous? Were they useful? Were they worth speaking to at all? The Council controlled 4,000 worlds. They had seen young species rise and fall like waves on a beach. Most species, when they discovered they were not alone in the universe, reacted in one of two ways. Some fell to their knees in worship. Others reached for weapons. The Council had protocols for both. But humans were strange. The Council's scientists could not predict them. Humans were capable of terrible cruelty and beautiful kindness, sometimes in the same afternoon. They killed each other over invisible lines drawn on maps, then risked their lives to save strangers from burning buildings. They poisoned their own air and water, then spent fortunes trying to clean it again. High Arbiter had studied the human file for 60 years. She was old, even by her species' long standards. Her silver skin had faded too. Her 4 eyes had grown tired from reading reports, but she could not understand humans, and this failure kept her awake at night. Finally, the Council voted. They would send observers. 12 of the Concord's finest minds would descend to Earth, live among humans, and learn their secrets. They would report every 10 planetary rotations. After 90 rotations, they would return home with their findings. Senior Observer was chosen to lead the mission. He was young and brilliant, with scales the color of deep water. He had studied 47 species during his career. He had written books about first contact protocols. He believed he understood the universe. He did not understand Earth. The ship descended on a quiet autumn evening. The location was carefully chosen, a rural area in a country called Korea, far from military bases and major cities. The Council wanted their observers to study ordinary humans, not soldiers or politicians. The ship landed in a field of cabbages. The vegetables were nearly ready for harvest, their leaves thick and green under the fatting sunlight. Checked his equipment, reviewed his protocols, and opened the door. The air smelled strange, rich and organic, full of scents his translators could not identify. The sky was turning orange and pink, colors that seemed impossible after a lifetime on stations with artificial light. Took his first step onto Earth. The soil was soft under his feet. An insect flew past his face and he flinched. Behind him, his 11 colleagues emerged slowly. They were scientists and linguists and behavioral analysts. They carried devices that could measure brain activity, emotional responses, and 100 other biological functions. They were prepared for anything. They were not prepared for. The old farmer appeared from between the rows of cabbages, a tool in his weathered hands. He was 63 years old. His back was bent from decades of work. His face was brown from the sun and lined with age. He stopped when he saw the aliens, 12 figures with scales and too many eyes, standing beside a ship that had crushed his cabbages. For a long moment, no one moved. Reached for his translation device. He had prepared a speech about peaceful intentions and galactic cooperation. He had practiced it many times. But spoke first. The old farmer looked at the crushed vegetables and sighed. Then he looked at the aliens and shrugged. He said something in his language, gestured toward a small house at the edge of the field, and began walking. The translator processed his words a moment later. "Well, you killed my cabbages. You might as well come inside for tea." Did not know what to do. This was not in the protocols. Hostile reactions had protocols. Worshipful reactions had protocols, but casual hospitality toward beings from another world. He followed the farmer. His house was small and warm. Shoes lined the entrance, and the farmer gestured for the aliens to remove their footwear. Realized they did not wear shoes, and an awkward moment passed before simply waved them inside anyway. The farmer's wife had died 7 years ago. His children had moved to the city. He lived alone with a cat named Mango, who took one look at the aliens and fell asleep on a sunny windowsill. Made tea. He moved slowly around his kitchen, filling a kettle with water, setting cups on a low table. The aliens watched him with 12 sets of eyes, recording everything, understanding nothing. When the tea was ready, sat down across from, he poured a cup and pushed it forward. "Drink," he said, "you look tired." Analyzed the liquid. It was not poisonous. He lifted the cup carefully and drank. The tea was warm and slightly bitter. It was the first thing had ever consumed on an alien world. He would remember its taste for the rest of his life. Asked questions. Where were they from? How long was the journey? Were they hungry? Did they have families? Answered carefully, still waiting for fear or aggression. But the old farmer simply nodded at each answer, as if visitors from distant stars were no stranger than visitors from the next village. By the time darkness fell, had fed the aliens rice and vegetables from his garden. He had shown them photographs of his late wife and his children. He had asked about their home world and listened carefully to the answers. When it grew late, he offered them his barn to sleep in. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's warm and dry. You can stay as long as you need." That night, sent his first report to the council. "Contact established with native human," he wrote. "Subject is elderly male agricultural worker. Initial response to our presence was not fear or worship but hospitality. He fed us and offered shelter. No weapons were displayed. No authorities were contacted. He treated us as guests." Paused, unsure how to continue. "Subject asked about our families," he added. "He seemed genuinely interested in our answers. When I told him about my sister he showed me a picture of his daughter. He said distance is hard, but family is family." Stared at the words on his screen. They seemed inadequate. "Further study required," he concluded. "There is something here we do not understand." 3 days later, the observers had moved into the village. The local people were surprised but not frightened. A woman named, a retired teacher, volunteered to help them learn Korean. She laughed when they mispronounced words and clapped when they got them right. The observers sent another report, integration progressing. Humans display consistent pattern of assistance toward outsiders, no payment requested, no conditions attached, motivation unclear. After that, the reports became shorter, then less frequent, then they stopped entirely. The council waited. 10 rotations passed, 20, 30. High Arbiter sent urgent requests for updates. She received no response. On the 40th rotation, she authorized a retrieval team. 30 soldiers, armed and armored, descended toward Earth. The council prepared for the worst. They imagined their observers dead, imprisoned, or enslaved. They did not imagine what they would actually find. Commander had served the Galactic Council for 200 years. She had fought in 3 wars. She had put down rebellions on 7 worlds. She had seen species surrender and species die fighting. Nothing surprised her anymore. She was wrong. The retrieval team descended through Earth's atmosphere in a military vessel, armed with weapons that could level cities. 30 soldiers sat in silence, checking their equipment and reviewing their orders. Find the observers, determine their status, extract them by any means necessary. Had seen the reports before they stopped. She had read about the farmer and his tea, the retired teacher and her language lessons. She did not trust any of it. In her experience, kindness was always a trap. Species that seemed gentle were often the most dangerous. The ship landed at night, far from human settlements, led her soldiers through the darkness, following the signal from the observers' equipment. The beacon led them toward the coast, to a small city that glowed with electric light. Expected resistance. She expected checkpoints and guards and questions. Instead, They walked through empty streets while humans slept in their homes. A dog barked at them from behind a fence. A drunk man stumbled past without even looking up. The beacon signal came from an apartment building. 5 floors of concrete and glass, laundry hanging from balconies, the smell of cooking food drifting from open windows. Positioned her soldiers around the building. She took 4 of her best fighters and entered through the main door. The stairs were narrow. The walls were thin. She could hear humans talking and laughing behind closed doors. The signal came from the 3rd floor. Apartment 302 stood before the door, weapon ready, and kicked it open. She found Senior Observer sitting at a low table. He held 2 wooden sticks in his fingers, using them to lift noodles from a steaming bowl. He looked up with calm eyes. "Commander," he said, "you should try this, it's called." Did not lower her weapon. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for threats. She saw 3 other observers sitting on cushions, watching a glowing screen. Images moved across it, humans in colorful clothing, singing and dancing. The observers laughed at something did not understand. "Where are the others?" demanded. "Around," said. He slurped his noodles. "Some are in the village where we landed. Others have moved to different cities. We spread out to study more humans." "You stopped reporting?" "Yes." "Why?" Set down his bowl. For a moment he looked tired. "Because we didn't know what to say." A door opened behind. She spun, weapon raised, and found herself pointing at a human woman. The woman was perhaps 30 years old, with short black hair and a round face. She wore soft clothing for sleeping and held a pot of dark liquid. "Oh," the woman said, looking at the soldiers. "More visitors." She smiled and held up the pot. "Coffee." Her name was. She lived in the apartment next door. When the observers moved into the building, she brought them food. When they struggled with human technology, she taught them how to use it. When they got sick from eating something wrong, she took care of them. She did not ask for anything in return. She was simply being a good neighbor. Did not understand. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you help them? They are strangers. They are not even your species." Thought about this question. She poured coffee into cups and handed one too. The commander did not drink it. "I don't know," admitted. "It's just what you do. Someone needs help, you help them. It's not complicated." Wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that the universe did not work this way. Species competed for resources. They fought for territory. They formed alliances based on benefit and betrayed those alliances when convenient. But she looked at who had returned to his noodles. She looked at the other observers who were teaching an alien card game. She looked at the apartment, which was small and messy and full of life. She lowered her weapon. Her report to the council was short. "Original team unharmed but compromised. They have integrated into human society. They refuse extraction, requesting guidance." The council responded immediately. "Return with detailed intelligence. Use force if necessary." Did not use force. Instead, she stayed. At first, she told herself it was for reconnaissance. She needed to understand what had happened to the observers. She needed to study the humans and find their weakness. She found no weakness. She found only more kindness. An old woman named Sunoke ran a small restaurant near the apartment building. When she learned that had never eaten Korean food, she was horrified. She sat the commander down and brought dish after dish, watching carefully to see what liked. "Too spicy?" Sunoke asked when his eyes watered. "I'll make it milder next time." There was a next time, and another, and another. A fisherman named Dong taught to mend nets. His hands were rough and from years of work. He did not speak much, but his silence was comfortable. When made a mistake, he gently corrected her. When she succeeded, he nodded with approval. "Why do you fish?" asked him one day. "You could buy food from stores, it would be easier." Dong looked out at the ocean. "My father fished," he said. "His father before him. It's not about easy, it's about connection, to the water, to the past, to the fish themselves. Did not understand, but she kept mending nets. The council sent more messages. Where was her report? Why had communication stopped? What was happening on Earth? Did not answer. She did not know how to explain. How could she tell them about Sunoke's cooking, which filled her with warmth she had never felt before? How could she describe Dong's patience, which asked nothing from her but presence? How could she explain the way humans touched each other casually, a hand on a shoulder, a pat on the back, as if physical contact was normal and natural? On her home world, touch was reserved for family and lovers. Strangers maintained distance. But here, humans touched freely. They hugged friends they hadn't seen in weeks. They held hands with their children in public. They sat close together on benches, shoulders almost touching, sharing space without fear. It was overwhelming. It was confusing. It was wonderful. 2 months passed. Soldiers had scattered across the coast. Some had found jobs. Others had found friends. One had fallen in love with a baker named Min who made sweet bread that melted on the tongue. Found herself spending more time with Dong. They fished together in the early morning when the water was calm and the sky was pink. They sat together in the evening, eating the fish they had caught. They talked about their lives, their losses, their hopes. Dong's wife had died 3 years ago. He still kept her photograph by his bed. He still talked to her sometimes, late at night when he thought no one could hear. "Do you believe she can hear you?" asked. Dong shrugged. "I don't know, but it makes me feel better, and maybe that's enough." Thought about this for a long time. Her final report to the council was only one sentence. "We are staying to understand. There is something here we cannot explain. Do not send more soldiers. Send philosophers." Then she turned off her communication device and went to help Dong with his boat. The council received the message and fell into chaos. What had happened to their soldiers? What power did the humans possess that could turn warriors into deserters? High Arbiter stared at the reports, all of them, from the first cup of tea to the last mysterious message. She looked for patterns. She looked for explanations. She found only questions. After long consideration, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She would go to Earth herself. The Galactic Council had not known fear for 10,000 years. They controlled the largest civilization in known space. Their fleets could darken the skies of any world. Their technology could reshape planets. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed rival empires, and guided countless species toward what they called enlightenment. But now they were afraid. 72 of their people had gone to Earth. Scientists, soldiers, diplomats, the best minds and strongest warriors the Council could send. Not one had returned. Not one had died according to the monitors. They were alive, healthy, and completely silent. The Council chambers buzzed with theories. Ambassador believed humans possessed a psychic weapon, something that rewired alien minds and turned them loyal to Earth. General argued for a biological agent, a virus that infected neural tissue and changed behavior. Others whispered about ancient technology, mind control devices left by some forgotten civilization. The militant faction demanded action. They wanted to quarantine Earth, surround it with warships, cut it off from the rest of the galaxy. If the humans could not be understood, they could at least be contained. Some went further. Admiral Vex proposed sterilization. A few well-placed weapons could burn the planet's surface clean. Whatever threat the humans posed would die with them. High Arbiter listened to these arguments and said nothing. She was the oldest member of the council, the most respected. When she finally spoke, the chamber fell silent. "I will go myself," she said. The council erupted in protest. She was too valuable, too important. If the humans could compromise soldiers and scientists, they could certainly compromise an arbiter. But had made up her mind. She was old. She had served the council for longer than most species existed. If she was going to die or lose her mind, She preferred to do it searching for truth rather than hiding from it. "If I do not return," she said, "then you will have your answer. You can burn Earth and never speak of this again." She descended alone, without weapons or guards. Her ship landed outside a great city, millions of humans packed into towers of steel and glass. The noise was overwhelming. Vehicles roared through streets. Music played from open windows. People shouted and laughed and argued in a dozen languages. Had studied human cities from orbit, but nothing prepared her for the reality. The smell of food and exhaust and humanity pressed against her. The movement of crowds made her dizzy. She had lived her entire life in the quiet order of council stations. This chaos was terrifying. She wandered through the streets, lost and confused. Humans stared at her, a silver-skinned alien with 4 eyes walking among them in broad daylight. Some pulled out devices and pointed them at her. Others hurried past, pretending not to see. Expected someone to attack her or run away screaming. Instead, a young man approached her with careful steps. His name was Ho. He was 24 years old, a university student studying literature. He had seen the alien woman standing on a street corner, looking at everything and nothing, obviously lost. "Are you okay?" he asked in English, then repeated the question in Korean when she did not respond. His translator processed his words. "I am looking for someone," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse. Ho nodded as if lost aliens were a normal part of his day. "Do you know where they are?" "No." "Do you have their address, phone number?" "No." Ho considered this situation. A reasonable person might have walked away. A fearful person might have called the authorities. But Ho had been raised by his grandmother, who taught him that kindness was not a choice but a duty. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "Had not eaten in 2 days." She shook her head. "Come on," Ho said. "My grandmother has a restaurant. She'll feed you, and we can figure out what to do." He walked without checking if she followed. Somehow she did. Sunokei's restaurant was small and warm. 6 tables, a kitchen in the back, walls covered with photographs and children's drawings. The old woman looked up when her grandson entered, then froze when she saw his companion. For a long moment, Sunokei stared at her silver skin, her multiple eyes, her strange proportions. The alien woman waited for fear, for rejection, for the reaction she had seen on countless worlds when species encountered something different. Sunokei walked around the counter. She was barely 5 feet tall, her hair and thin, her hands spotted with age. She stopped in front of and looked up at the alien's face. "Are you hungry, child?" she asked. Did not know how to answer. No one had called her child in 200 years. No one had looked at her with such simple concern. She tried to speak and found she could not. Something was happening in her chest, a tightness she did not understand. Her vision blurred. She was crying. She did not know why. She had not cried since she was young, since before she learned that council members must be strong and cold and distant. But standing in this small restaurant, faced with an old woman's kindness, something broke inside her. Sunokei did not ask questions. She guided to a table and pressed a warm cup into her hands. Tea, realized, just like the farmer had given on that first night. "Drink," Sunokei said, "then eat, we can talk later." Drank. The tea was different with a floral note, but the warmth was the same. It spread through her body and loosened something in her chest. Sunokei brought food, rice and soup and small dishes of vegetables. She watched eat, refilling her cup whenever it emptied. "Where are you from?" Sunokei asked eventually. "Far away," said, "very far." "Are you in trouble?" "I don't know, maybe." Sunokei nodded. "We all have trouble sometimes. You can stay here until you figure things out." "I can't pay you." The old woman laughed. "Did I ask for payment? Eat your soup, it's getting cold." That night slept in a small room above the restaurant. The bed was narrow and the blankets smelled like lavender. She could hear the city outside, traffic and voices, and the distant sound of music. She did not send a report to the council. She did not know what she would say. She thought about the farmer who offered tea to strangers, the teacher who gave free language lessons, the woman who made coffee for armed soldiers, the old woman who fed an alien without asking for anything in return. She thought about Ho, who saw a lost stranger and chose to help, not because he expected a reward, not because he feared punishment, simply because helping was what he did. On her home world, there was a word for this kind of behavior. The translation was something like irrational altruism. It was considered a flaw, a weakness, a failure of proper cost-benefit analysis. But lying in that narrow bed, wrapped in lavender-scented blankets, wondered if the council had been wrong. Maybe kindness was not irrational. Maybe it was the most rational thing in the universe. She fell asleep with that thought in her mind. For the first time in years, she did not dream of politics and power. She dreamed of tea. In the morning, Suno-K was already cooking. The smell of breakfast filled the restaurant. Ho sat at a table, reading a book while eating rice and eggs. "Good morning," he said when appeared. "Grandmother says you can stay as long as you need." Looked at Suno-K, who was stirring something on the stove. "I am a stranger. You know nothing about me." "I know you were hungry," Suno-K said without turning around. "I know you were lost. I know you needed help." She finally looked at her old eyes warm. "That's enough to know." Sat down at the table. Ho poured her a cup of tea. "So," he said, "who are you looking for?" "Other people like me," said. "They came here before. They stopped communicating with our leaders." Ho nodded thoughtfully. "Aliens, I've heard rumors, people talking about strange visitors in the countryside." He pulled out his phone. "Let me make some calls." Within an hour, he had found a connection. His cousin knew someone who had seen an alien working in a community garden outside the city. "I can take you there," Ho offered. "Why would you do that?" Ho shrugged. "Because you're lost and I know the way." Did not understand humans. She was beginning to think she never would. But she followed Ho anyway. Ho drove an old car that made concerning noises whenever it went uphill. Sat in the passenger seat, watching the city give way to smaller towns and then to countryside. Green fields stretched toward distant mountains. Rivers cut silver paths through valleys. Farmhouses dotted the landscape, surrounded by crops and animals. It was beautiful. Had seen thousands of worlds from orbit, gas giants with swirling storms, ice planets that glittered like diamonds, jungle worlds so green they hurt the eyes. But she had rarely walked on any of them. Council members traveled in ships and stations, separated from planets by layers of metal and glass. Here on Earth she could smell the soil and feel the wind. She could hear birds singing songs she did not recognize. She understood, finally, why her observers had stopped sending reports. How could words capture this? The community garden was on the outskirts of a small village. Rows of vegetables grew in neat lines. Fruit trees provided shade for wooden benches. And there, kneeling in the dirt with a group of human children, was Senior Observer. He looked different. His scales had faded from deep blue to a softer shade. His eyes seemed calmer, less sharp. He wore human clothing, loose pants and a shirt stained with soil. When he saw approaching, he did not stand at attention or bow as protocol demanded. He simply smiled. "Arbiter," he said, "I wondered when you would come." The children looked up with curiosity. One little girl, perhaps 6 years old, tugged at sleeve. "Is she your friend?" the girl asked. "She's my boss," said. "Well, she used to be." The girl considered this information. "Does she like tomatoes? We grew tomatoes." Looked at, there was something in his expression, not fear or guilt, but something like hope. "Do you like tomatoes, Arbiter?" Did not know how to answer. She had never thought about whether she liked tomatoes. She had eaten for nutrition, not pleasure. She had lived for duty, not enjoyment. "I don't know," she admitted. The little girl ran off and returned with a ripe tomato, red and round and warm from the sun. She pressed it into his hands. "Try it," the girl said. "I grew it myself." Bit into the tomato. Juice ran down her chin. The taste was sweet and earthy, unlike anything she had experienced in 2 centuries of synthetic nutrition. "It's good," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "It's very good." The little girl beamed with pride. Smile grew wider. They walked through the village together, pointing out the places that had become important to him. The bakery where he bought bread every morning. The school where he taught alien mathematics to curious students. The small house where he lived with a family that had adopted him like a strange uncle. "Why?" asked finally. "Why did you stop reporting? Why did you stay?" Was quiet for a long moment. They had stopped at a bridge over a small stream. Below them, water flowed over smooth stones. "At first I tried to explain," he said. "I wrote reports about human behavior, their hospitality towards strangers, their care for the weak and elderly, their willingness to help without expecting reward." He shook his head. But the words felt empty, like describing a sunset to someone who has never seen light. He picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. "The Council sees the universe as a system, resources to be managed, species to be controlled. Every action has a cost and benefit. Every relationship is a transaction." He looked at. "But humans don't think that way. They help because helping feels right. They love because love is its own reward. They create beauty for no reason except that beauty matters." "That is inefficient," said. It was what the Council would say. "Yes," agreed. "Wonderfully, gloriously inefficient. They waste time and energy on things that have no practical value. They write poems and paint pictures and sing songs that accomplish nothing. They sit with dying friends even when medicine has failed just so no one has to be alone at the end." His voice was thick with emotion. "Do you know what they call that, Arbiter? They call it being human." Thought about Sunoke, who fed strangers because feeding people was what she did. She thought about Ho, who helped a lost alien because helping was natural. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said. Over the following weeks, found her other observers. Commander lived in a fishing village by the sea. She had married Dongan, a small ceremony attended by the entire village. She wore flowers in her scales and smiled in a way that would have shocked her former soldiers. "I found peace here," told. "I spent 200 years fighting. I thought that was all I was, a weapon, a tool, but Dong saw something else in me. He saw someone worth loving." She showed her home, a simple cottage by the water. Fishing nets hung from the walls. Photographs of their wedding sat on shelves beside seashells and smooth stones. "The Council will call you a traitor," said. Shrugged. "The Council has never sat on a beach and watched the sunset with someone they love. They don't know what they're missing." Found in a city, living with a young couple who had given her a room in their apartment. Had been one of the Council's best linguists, capable of learning any language within days. Now she spent her time at a community center, teaching Korean to immigrants from other countries. "Languages are not just words," explained. "They're windows into how people think, what they value, how they see the universe." She gestured to her students, humans from a dozen different nations, struggling with grammar and pronunciation. These people left their homes to build new lives here. Learning the language is how they connect, how they become part of something larger. That afternoon, watched teach. She saw the frustration and the breakthroughs, the laughter when someone made a mistake, the joy when understanding finally came. After class, a woman approached with a baby in her arms. "Can you watch her for an hour? I have a job interview." Took the baby without hesitation. "Go, good luck, we'll be fine." The woman ran off and sat with the sleeping infant, rocking gently. "This child's mother is from another country," told. She speaks 3 languages, has a university degree, and can't find work because people hear her accent and assume she's stupid. Her voice was fierce. But she keeps trying. She keeps fighting, not for herself but for this little one. Look down at the baby. Humans don't give up. They lose everything and start over. They fail and try again. They face impossible odds and keep moving forward, not because they're sure they'll win, but because giving up is not in their nature. Found herself thinking about the Council's fears, the theories about mind control and psychic weapons, the proposals to quarantine or destroy Earth. They had missed the truth entirely. Humans were not dangerous because they had weapons or powers. They were dangerous because they were contagious. Their kindness spread like a virus. Their hope infected everyone who came close. The observers had not been captured or controlled. They had simply been welcomed. They had been fed and housed and treated with respect. They had been given something they never knew they needed, a place to belong. How could the Council fight against that? How could they defend against the weapon of being loved? Sat alone that night on a hill outside the village where lived. The stars were beautiful from Earth, different from how they looked on the stations, softer somehow. She thought about her life, 200 years of service, of duty and protocol and careful political maneuvering. She had power and respect and the loyalty of trillions. But she had never grown a tomato. She had never watched a sunset with someone she loved. She had never held a baby or taught a child or sat with a friend in comfortable silence. What had she been living for? The question hurt, the answer hurt more. She had been living for nothing, nothing that mattered anyway. When morning came, made a decision. She would not return to the Council, not as their arbiter anyway. She had one more task to complete first. 6 months had passed since the first observers landed in Cabbage Field. The old farmer still grew his vegetables, though now he had help. 3 aliens worked alongside him, learning the rhythms of planting and harvest. They had become part of the village, strange uncles and aunts who spoke Korean with funny accents and sometimes forgot which end of the hoe to use. Across the peninsula, 93 aliens had built new lives among humans. They worked in gardens and restaurants, in schools and fishing boats. They had found friends and lovers and families. They had learned to cook and sing and dance. They had discovered what it meant to belong. But knew the Council would not wait forever. Sooner or later they would act. A fleet would come. Weapons would fire. Everything beautiful that had grown here would burn. She could not let that happen. Working with the observers, she gathered materials and knowledge. Working with the humans, she found someone who could help bridge 2 worlds. His name was Wu. He was 28 years old, a communications engineer who had grown up fascinated by signals and waves, and the ways information traveled across distance. When explained what they needed, a device that could send a message across the galaxy, Wu's eyes lit up with excitement. "You want to build an alien radio?" he asked. "Something like that," said. "Cool, let's do it." They worked for 2 months. Wu learned alien technology while teaching his own. The device grew in his small apartment, surrounded by tools and diagrams and empty cups of coffee. Other humans helped, a physicist who calculated signal strength, an artist who designed the interface, a grandmother who brought food because you can't work on an empty stomach. When it was finished, they gathered in a field outside the city. 93 aliens and hundreds of humans stood together under the open sky. The device hummed with power, pointed toward stars that had never seemed so close. Stood before the transmitter. She had written a speech, careful words designed to persuade the Council, to make them understand. But looking at the faces around her, alien and human, mixed together like a garden of different flowers, she realized the speech was wrong. Words had failed before. They would fail again. The Council needed something different. She turned to Wu. "Would you speak for us?" The young engineer blinked in surprise. "Me? But I'm nobody. I'm not a leader or a diplomat." "You're human," said. "That's what they need to see." Wu looked at the transmitter, then at the crowd around him. His mother stood near the back, her face full of pride and worry. His friends from university clustered together, giving him thumbs up. The aliens watched him with hope in their many eyes. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The signal would take hours to reach the council, but once it arrived, it would play on every screen in the chamber. The entire Galactic Council would see and hear what happened next. Wu spoke. "Hello, my name is Wu. I'm a human from Earth. I build things that help people talk to each other." His voice was nervous at first, but it steadied as he continued. "I know you're scared of us. I know you sent people to study us, and they didn't come back the way you expected. I know you're probably thinking about how to protect yourselves from whatever we did to them." He paused, looking at the aliens around him, nodded encouragingly. "But we didn't do anything to them. We just welcomed them. We fed them when they were hungry. We gave them places to sleep. We taught them our language and learned theirs. We showed them our world, the good parts and the bad parts. We let them see who we really are." Wu's voice grew stronger. "We're not perfect. We fight and argue and make terrible mistakes. We've hurt each other and our planet in ways we're still trying to fix. We're messy and loud and inefficient and sometimes really, really stupid." Behind him, some of the humans laughed. Even some of the aliens smiled. "But we also love. We love our families and our friends and our communities. We love strangers we've never met. We send food and medicine to people on the other side of the planet because their suffering matters to us. We love ideas and art and music. We love the universe itself, even when it scares us." He gestured to the crowd behind him. "Your people came to study us like specimens, but they found something you didn't expect. They found a place where they were welcomed. They found people who cared about them, not because they were useful or powerful, but just because they were there. They found us." Wu's voice softened. "We're not warriors or conquerors. We don't have the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons. We're just people who learned that the universe is cold and dark and lonely, so we make warmth for each other. We light candles against the darkness. We hold each other when we're scared." He looked directly at the transmitter, as if he could see the council chambers beyond. "Your observers aren't prisoners. They're not brainwashed or controlled. They're family now. And families don't send reports to governments. Families send invitations." Behind him, Sunoke stepped forward, the old woman who had fed an alien stranger without asking questions. She looked at the transmitter and waved, as if greeting old friends. "Come," she said in Korean. Wu translated, "Eat, stay a while." One by one, other humans joined her. The farmer who started it all with a cup of tea, who offered coffee to armed soldiers, Ho, who helped a lost alien find her people, Dong, who taught a warrior how to mend nets and love again. They waved and smiled. Some held up food, rice cakes and fish and vegetables from their gardens, an offering of hospitality to beings they had never met. The aliens joined them, stood beside, his hand on the old farmer's shoulder, held Dong's hand, her scales bright in the sunlight, cradled a human baby, showing the infant to the camera as if introducing her to distant relatives. Was the last to join. She stood at the front of the group, looking toward the stars that had been her home. "I was sent here to find out what happened to our people," she said. "I found out. They discovered something wonderful, something the council has forgotten or maybe never knew." She spread her arms, indicating everyone around her. "This is what happened to them. This is the weapon that defeated them. This is the power that humans possess." She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 200 years. Love, kindness, welcome, the simple act of seeing a stranger and choosing to help. The message ended with coordinates to Earth, and a phrase that had learned from on his very first night, sitting in a small farmhouse, drinking tea with an alien. "Come eat, stay a while." The transmission ended. The crowd cheered. Humans and aliens embraced, laughing and crying, celebrating something that might change the universe. But the work was not done. Far away, in the great chambers of the Galactic Council, the message arrived. Screens flickered to life. The assembled leaders of 4,000 worlds watched a young human invite them to dinner. They debated for 19 days. The arguments were fierce. Some still wanted to quarantine Earth, to protect themselves from whatever influence had taken their people. Others wanted to ignore the message entirely, to pretend it had never been received. But the image stayed with them. 93 of their own, standing beside humans, looking happier than any council member had seen anyone look in 1,000 years. The old woman waving, the baby in the alien's arms, the farmer and the observer standing together like brothers. And the words, simple words that cut through all the fear and suspicion. Come eat, stay a while. In the end, it was not a military calculation or a political compromise that decided things. It was curiosity. It was loneliness. It was the quiet voice that every species carries within them, the voice that says, maybe I don't have to be alone. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council accepted an invitation. The fleet that came to Earth carried no weapons. It brought diplomats and scientists, teachers and artists. It brought gifts from 100 worlds, seeds and songs, stories and technologies. Sunokei's restaurant was too small for the delegation. They had to hold the welcome feast in a field outside the city. Tables stretched for kilometers. Dishes from Earth sat beside dishes from worlds that had never known sunlight. Sat between Ho and Ambassador, who had once argued for Earth's destruction. Now was trying to use chopsticks, failing badly, and laughing at himself while Ho gave patient instruction. Across the table was showing alien diplomats how to make kimchi. He had appointed himself Earth's culinary ambassador, determined to share his culture one cabbage at a time. And Dong had brought fish from their village. They moved through the crowd together, offering samples to anyone who was curious. Wu sat with and a group of alien linguists, comparing grammatical structures across species. They were planning a dictionary that would help the two civilizations understand each other. And Sunokei was everywhere, refilling cups and checking plates, making sure no one went hungry. When she finally sat down to rest, joined her. "Thank you," said, "for everything." Sunokei shrugged. "I didn't do anything special, I just did what anyone would do." "No," said gently, "you did what humans do, the rest of the galaxy has forgotten how." The old woman smiled and patted his hand. "Then I guess we'll have to teach them." Above them stars burned in the darkness, cold and distant as they had always been, but tonight they seemed closer somehow, more like neighbors than strangers. The universe was still vast and dark and full of unknown dangers, but it was a little less lonely than it had been before. And in kitchens and gardens and fishing villages across Earth, humans continued to do what they had always done. They welcomed strangers. They shared meals. They opened their hearts to anyone who needed a place to belong. It was not a grand strategy or a brilliant plan. It was just kindness, offered freely, expected nothing in return. It was, perhaps, the most powerful force in the universe. And it had changed everything.